morning, good afternoon, or good evening to wherever you are in the world. Hi, I'm Dan. Today on the Process Pros, and today with me I have Janville Young, who is a process discovery expert, for one of the better things. Got a few more other tricks up his belt. But welcome, Janville. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Dan.
All right, got a couple of burning questions for you. Now, as a few people may know, Nintex acquired Cryon a few months back now, which brought a couple of new feature sets into the the stable, one being a new RPA tool and the other being process discovery. Now, there's a lot of talk on the internet around process discovery and process mining and task mining. They're really hot topics at the moment. And there's not a great deal of vendors out there that are actually doing these types of things. And it's not your traditional automation stuff that we've seen, over the last 10 years, especially in the Nintex realm of sort of software and how you go about automation. So when I started looking into this and reading about process mining, I got quite confused sometimes around, okay, what is the difference between process mining and process discovery, and then also task mining in there as well, because there are a lot of things out there on the internet. Some are more correct than others, and some are just flat out wrong, and that might be just because they're old and things have evolved. So tell me, Janville, what, in layman's terms, real quick and easy, what is the difference between process mining, process discovery?
Yeah, it's a good question. People do get confused or use the terms incorrectly. So process mining, in a nutshell, gives you a high-level end-to-end view of how a process operates. And that's based on gathering information purely from system logs, event logs, and that's it. And you would need months and months of data to get to map the process itself in terms of what systems talk to which systems, etc., to execute a particular process. So that gives you a high level of overview in terms of what's involved in the process. Process discovery, or task mining, as it's also known as, gives you a more granular view in terms of how users interact with each step of that process. So you have a real understanding in terms of what people are actually doing to perform a particular task. That's part of that overall process itself. And the two can complement one another. So one analogy you can use would be, say, for example, process mining. You could have a warehouse full of goods. I could be the manager of that warehouse, and I would have an inventory of all the items in stock. I would know, where my trainers, sneakers are, t-shirts, etc., who the suppliers are, and where they've come from, etc., and when they came into the warehouse. So I've got all that information in various systems that I can retrieve. But I don't know actually how it got there. So sometimes I might receive an order. Maybe it takes, it should be a next day delivery. Maybe it gets there before 9 o'clock. Sometimes it gets there at 10, sometimes at 12, for example. And then maybe I need to understand, well, why is there a variance in terms of why some deliveries come sooner or later than others on certain days, etc. But I don't have visibility. All I know is where the goods come from and when they arrive, etc. So with the task mining or process discovery points, if you imagine I had a dash cam or webcam attached to that delivery driver delivering those goods, you would actually see the journey they took to deliver those items to the warehouse. So on the Monday, for instance, you could see, well, they took a particular route or route, and they got there before 9. And then on the next day, you can see, well, actually, they took a different route. Maybe there was a traffic incident or a road closure. So they took a different route. So that gives you the understanding in terms of the variance, in terms of, well, we understand what the process is. So I need to order some items, and it comes the next day. But then we use task mining or process discovery, and we can actually track the journey of that particular step. So we know that particular driver took a different route, or maybe the next day when it was late, it was a different driver, same company, but they got lost. So they were unaware of the particular or the optimal route they should be taking. So that's the analogy I like to use to distinguish between process mining and process discovery or task mining. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And you mentioned one thing there, you just snuck it in there, that task mining. Now, you were saying earlier off the call that task mining and process discovery are essentially are interchangeable. So why are there two, I guess, different terms coined for that?
Um, Partly marketing. So Cryon developed process discovery, or the technology, and also the term about 40 years ago. And we found that others in the field, or the competitors, started to follow, and they just referred to it as task mining. So that's the only reason why.
Right. So there was task mining out there, and then essentially there was process discovery, and they're kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
So really, there's not really three different technologies here. There's just two different technologies, but three different names.
Correct. Yeah, yeah. To add more confusion. Yeah, yeah.
Not
I guess it
confusing at
kind of
all.
makes sense. If you're currently working on process mining, process discovery can get a bit confusing. So I guess task mining is easier to distinguish between process mining and task mining. Two separate terms.
Gotcha. I guess so. So tell me what. I mean, this is a hot topic, right? So what are the trends that are driving this process mining or process discovery in organisations today?
There's a number of different reasons why it's a number of different directions, a number of different opportunities. Now, when I first started in this field, the primary objective was to have process discovery or task mining to find automation opportunities, because typically in RPA programs, automation programs, it's quite common for companies to spend up to 70% of time and resource on the planning and the analysis of what processes are suitable for automation, and only 30% on the actual automation itself. So that was a primary focus, if we're talking about 3-4 years ago. But because of the way that process discovery works, is just examining or identifying repetitive steps or processes within an organization, and typically those are primary candidates for automation. But what we're also finding is people can use this as an opportunity purely for documentation, because we're monitoring and recording those activities. So we have lots of organizations that simply don't have any documentation, or the documentation they do have is out of date, and they struggle with keeping it up to date and current. But also, we're getting more interest from people interested in process excellence, process optimization, because again, they need the documentation, or they need to understand what's actually happening out in the field before they can actually make improvements to that process.
Yeah.
So you can't improve that without knowing where you are today as a baseline. So there's a number of different use cases. It's quite an eye opener when we go to organizations and we run process discovery. The primary purpose may be to find automation opportunities, but sometimes it could be an eye opener to the organization, and they think, well, actually, why is this department, why is this user doing this process in this way? They should be doing it in a different way, etc. Or we can see people using completely different methods to execute the same process, and that can be across the team, across different regions as well. So one customer I was recently working with, they were looking at standardization or non-standardization of processes across their regional offices or teams, etc. And there was a massive discrepancy between those regions. So that raised a number of red flags for them. So again, it just gives visibility in terms of what's out there. So it's really reality versus perception in terms of what business thinks people are actually doing out in the field.
Gotcha. And what's driving some of these trends? Like, are organizations, as you were saying, looking for optimization, and that's kind of what's driving it, or is there things along regulation, where organizations need to be more compliant with new data rules, for example, and things along those lines? Or has it the pandemic and sort of the after effects of that, in terms of smaller workforces, workforces working from home, remote, so the remote sort of remote workers now would have changed a lot of processes from being probably more manual, because you could just print something out and go and put it in an inbox, as opposed to now where it needs to be digital and needs to be delivered digitally to be able to go between people's houses because you're not on the same floor anymore. Are you seeing that that's driving a lot of demand in this particular field, or is it just organic growth of, new technology and stuff?
It's a combination of both. Me personally, when I've come across those organisations, a lot of it's down to becoming more efficient, optimizing operations, process excellence, continuous improvement. And one of the ways in which process discovery or task mining can address that is, again, just really understanding how processes are currently being executed, being able to document that, and then making a decision or informed decision in terms of how they want to progress from point A to point B. But you're right, in terms of the pandemic, more people working remotely, is the way that process discovery works is that we're able to digitally record user activity. And it just runs in the background. So we're not asking or having to ask them to run specific processes at a specific time, or to ask them to press the record and stop button every time they run a particular task or process we're interested in. It just runs in the background. And because we can do that remotely, we can monitor that information centrally and make it more efficient. So rather than spending traditionally having an external consultant or yourself shadowing or interviewing that individual for at least a week, we can do that remotely. And obviously with the pandemic, that's just not feasible anyway because of remote working and isolation, etc. So that we're able to do that remotely, and we can deploy this tactically if you want. So you don't need to deploy it to the whole organization, just to areas of interest at a particular point. Because another thing to address is that it's a powerful tool in terms of task mining, process discovery, in terms of the information, the activities that we collect from those end users. And we don't want to be overwhelmed with too much data, because if you have too much data, then people just lose focus. So it's very focused in terms of what we want to achieve. And so that's why, even if an organization has 20,000 people, we don't go in with the approach we're going to monitor the activity of 20,000. We'll just say we'll start in one area, one business unit, and a representative sample of those individuals in that department that maybe execute 85, 90% of the processes that are typical in that business unit.
Right. And what's the typical time frame to, I guess, look for these, automation opportunities? Is it a case of grabbing a department of, say, 20, 30 people and running the agents across those people for a week, a month, 6 months? What sort of timeframes do you typically see people running these processes to discover stuff?
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's one of the massive or biggest differences between process mining and process discovery or task mining. Is process mining, at a minimum, we would need months and months of logs and data to analyze before you can actually build up a picture of what the process looks like. With process discovery or task mining, we can build out that picture pretty quickly. I mean, within days. So if a department, for example, they're running relatively repetitive tasks, maybe 2-3 times a day, then it's not unusual to have enough information within 1 or 2 weeks, or even that same afternoon, to give you an indication of, actually, we've already spotted a few processes that are prime candidates for automation, for example. That's quite common to get that within the first couple of days. And then obviously we would leave that for 5 to 10 days. But there's always the preconception with organizations that are familiar with the traditional way of process discovery or process mining. The preconception is we need to have this running in the system for 1 to 3 months to get all the data we need. And that's simply not the case. I mean, to give you an example, we're working with one customer, and we went in, well, the customer's intention was to actually compare us with the external consultants who already started their work. They were in there for 8 to 12 weeks, generated a report a few weeks after. We went in, did exactly the same in terms of process discovery, and we spent 2 weeks in there, and we came up with very similar results. And the difference was ours was an automated and repeatable process, whereas external consultants,
it could be redeployed out to another department a couple of weeks later to do the exact same process over and over again until you've covered the entire organization. So
Exactly, and those consultants, they came in, and that was just for one line of business. So if they want to
right,
repeat that process, it's obviously more money for them. And
yeah,
whereas us, it's automated. And it's interesting in that particular use case. Um, what they found was in one department, I think it was the Treasury Department. They found, yep, great, lots of repetitive standardized processes, good candidates for automation. And then they looked at the settlements team. They said, yeah, although it was repetitive, it was unstructured, so people were sending a request via email, instant messaging, etc. And they made a decision: we're not going to automate a bad process. So it depends on your priorities. Some organisations are quite happy to, or okay with automating a bad process because it does provide additional efficiencies because it's automated. But some people take the stance in terms of, well, if it's a bad process, we shouldn't be encouraging that. We should optimize before we start to automate that. Is the approach they took.
right, yeah. Now, do you have to choose between process mining and process discovery, or can they coexist? For example,
They can coexist, yeah. So process discovery is more focused on the user interaction with um, the systems or applications. Um, so we understand how people use those systems, and that marries up quite nicely with RPA solutions because if you want to automate a process, you need to know exactly how users interact with a particular application. So process discovery, RPA go hand in hand. Okay, process mining looks at a very much high level view. So with task mining, is typically we call it process discovery, but essentially it's a task we're looking at and not necessarily the whole process end to end. So process mining gives you a high level overview of what that process looks like end to end. And the two complement one another because you can use process mining to actually identify bottlenecks. So you might identify a bottleneck between one particular stage or between two subtasks or sub-processes. So you know where the bottleneck exists, but you don't necessarily understand the root cause of that. And that's where task mining or process discovery comes into play because we have the ability to actually understand how users are interacting with the applications or systems at that particular step of that process. So that's how the two complement one another.
gotcha. That makes sense. So for people, watching this and they're in their center of excellences within their organizations, or they're just getting started. They might have been using workflow tools or RPA tools for some time, and they're looking for that. They're looking for the next process to go out and help the business be more optimized. Right? Where is a good place to start?
You mean to look for opportunities?
Just to start looking for opportunities, and even do they start with process mining or task mining or discovery? Because it could
So,
be, like you say, it could be overwhelming, right? Like going in and running this thing, and all of a sudden now you've got 200 new automation possibilities, and
yeah.
when you're just looking for one. So in terms of like when I asked, where would you start? I guess, would you advise, like, before you go off and you install or get some trials for process discovery or process mining, whatever, with whatever vendor, what are some of the questions, and I guess what are some of the things that you should be thinking about that you're looking to solve?
Okay, so to answer the first part of that question, if you're looking to automate processes, then you would start with process discovery. Process mining is not really suitable for that. Process mining is just looking at the overall end-to-end process, not the actual mechanics involved in the
Right.
process itself. So you start off with process discovery or task mining. Then I would probably speak to the business, just approach them and say, look, are there any opportunities or any tasks that you feel that could be better served automated? And if they do, just engage with them and just say, look, we'd like to just monitor a couple of your users just to understand what the actual situation is. And you could also do the same for other departments that really haven't considered it at all, because it's quite common when speaking to automation leads. They struggle to find new opportunities to automate. Once they've automated, identified the low-hanging fruit and automated those opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And often they go to another part of the business and they might say, yep, we've got lots of processes we want to automate. And when they actually look at it, they're actually not. They're more process driven or process issues as opposed to user intervention automation itself in terms of automation opportunities. And then they'll go to another department where they say, no, we're not interested. And that's it. They've got no comeback to that at all. So using process discovery is an easy way of actually discovering what's actually happening out in the field with minimal disruption to the end users, because people don't like being interviewed or being watched over their shoulder. So we can have a system to actually monitor their activities discreetly. We're very open about what we're doing, but it doesn't interrupt their day-to-day activities. That's the main thing. So that's the approach I would typically advise to take.
Right. And just on that too, there has been, I mean, I've had feedback from people when I've been talking about process discovery, and in terms of, hey, is this kind of like a covert Big Brother tool where it's installed on my computer and it's watching and listening to everything that essentially I'm doing on my desktop? Has there been concerns raised, by people that are looking at this particular software, or is it more of a case of the people that are coming that are looking for this software are not the ones that are going to be raising those questions? It's going to be more like, it's going to be people in the business who are going to, you're going to be what on my desktop? Are you going to be watching me? Are you going to know everything that I do? So at lunchtime when I'm surfing, Google, looking at YouTube, are you recording all of that stuff as well?
Yeah, we get asked that question all the time for obvious reasons. And we're very open with the customers and their end users in terms of what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to understand what processes we could automate. So effectively, you can do more with less. We can offload those routine mundane tasks so you can concentrate on the higher value activities instead. But the system we have is fully open. You can actually see it on your system if you open it up. And we always advise just to monitor the applications that are relevant to the processes you're interested in. So if someone goes to LinkedIn or Facebook at their lunchtime, that activity isn't recorded. But if you go into Salesforce, whatever, the Excel, etc., then that activity is recorded because it's related to your work. And technically speaking, they shouldn't have any qualms with that because it's related to work.
Right.
The other thing to stipulate is the fact that this is not supposed to be a permanent solution. It's there for a short period of time to understand what processes they're executing, how they're being executed. And then after that is finished, we move on to another area of the business. We might revisit them maybe 3-6 months down the line if those processes have been changed as a result of the original activities in terms of optimizing them. But it's not a permanent Big Brother. We're watching everything you're doing on a daily basis. It may be for 1 or 2 weeks, and that's it. Then we move on.
Right. And in that sort of respect, right, like you install this, like from a Crion's point of view, right? The Crion Process Discovery, you install the server, you've got your agents that go out and do that thing. What's the best way to ask this? I have my agents, it goes out and I do the finance department, and great, we found a whole heap of repeatable tasks that we can automate, whether it be workflow, RPA, or we've documented a whole heap of stuff that we're not going to automate, but hey, we've now got the documentation for training, et cetera, on how these processes work from A to Z. Now we go off and do another department. Now, at some stage, you're going to get through the entire organization. What value does the software, I guess, keep giving me, like after now I've gone through? Now, you mentioned, hey, go back and revisit departments so I can, it's been 12 months since we've gone through the finance department. Do we now do that again just so we can revisit, remonitor those same processes now that they've been automated? And can we use process discovery, I guess, to map, or not monitor, but evaluate the differences between what it was 12 months ago and now.
Yeah, exactly that. Because the only constant is change is constant within I'd say all or most organisations out there. So you may run the exercise in terms of optimization for one department, and then a few months later, those processes may evolve, will change, will be out of date. So you need to go back and revalidate that, whether it's the following year or the next 6 months, etc. Because
Right.
everything's always changing, services, products, etc., evolving as well. So
Hmm.
it needs to be up to date, and that's what we can do to actually use that to revisit those processes we optimized 3 6 months ago to make them they're still up to date and still optimized. As part of and things are always changing, so it's a case of continuous improvement.
Yeah.
So
So it's just that continuous improvement, and yeah, gotcha. That makes total sense. So last one. What does the so in your head, what does the future look like for this particular field? Like, it is so I say it's relatively new, but it's not, right? Process mining has been around for a while. Um, Task mining's been around for a while. It's not new technology, but it's gaining, I guess, it's gaining steam and a lot more momentum in organizations today. Typically, it's been in much larger organizations. Now, in my mind, I'm thinking that, hey, this stuff's going to be over time, as the technology improves, it gets more nimble. Um, it's going to be a lot more uh, attractive to smaller organizations that may not be looking at this type of stuff currently, because it is a big enterprise type, well, it's seen as a big enterprise type tool. In your mind, what do you think the future holds for process discovery?
I think we'll probably see more products platforms out there which tie process discovery more closely with process mining, because the two do go hand in hand. What I'm also seeing is making more potential in terms of the data we collect as part of the process discovery piece, and using it more intelligently. So at the moment, we're using AI, machine learning, to identify processes by repetition. So looking at screenshots along with the metadata on individuals' activities. The next step I see is going a step further in terms of actually being able to examine the contents of those screens and making a link with different processes. Because process mining gives you a high level end-to-end view of a process, whereas with task mining or process discovery is typically the sub-processes. So what you may have is disjointed sub-processes executed by different areas of the business. So the next step is to actually automatically look at the contents of certain applications, screenshots we've captured, and make the link between different sub-processes we've seen elsewhere. So, for example, if there's a case number reference we've seen in a screenshot, and if we see that same reference number in a different sub-process, maybe by a different department, to have the ability to automatically link those together. So, again, trying to do more of the heavy lifting. So when the business analyst or subject matter expert, they have less, or they can make more efficient use of their time by having all this information presented to them on a plate, if you like, rather than them having to
Right.
do all the analysis themselves.
And I guess in that same vein, I guess as the data quality improves, and that capturing and the machine learning about those repetitive tasks improves, do you foresee that the machine learning, or like the AI, essentially could offer up, hey, these are the improvements that are recommended out of the box? So when that business analyst does get the report,
Yeah.
the improvements are already being suggested in terms of, these are the things that you could be looking at, or these are the things that are suggested to do to improve this particular process.
That's actually something we're currently looking at, actually. So it's funny. This wasn't a stage question. So yeah, so we get asked that question a lot in terms of, here's a list of processes we've discovered. Well, which ones do we need to prioritize? And there are standard ways of doing it, but it's quite generic. Just looking at the metrics. So what we're looking at
Yeah.
is getting input in terms of from the customer in terms of what's important, what are their priorities, and based on that input, determine which of those processes we've identified matches that criteria and prioritize accordingly to that, rather than just a blanket, just looking at the numbers itself, but understanding what the priorities for the customer, and then applying that to the rules to determine which processes are here on top of that list.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that sounds awesome. I'm really excited about this stuff. As most technologists, I guess, know, learning new technology when it comes across your desk is always pretty exciting. It's like getting a new T-shirt at the conference. It's like, yes, new T-shirt. All right, thanks for that, Janville. We've come to time. I'm looking forward to actually jumping back into this topic and doing some more sessions. So free up your calendar for that one, and we'll get these a bit more on the reg to really dive into what this actually looks like, and we might bring up some product next time maybe and show some of that.
Yeah, no worries, I can do that.
Awesome, thanks, mate. Well, until next time, see everyone, and this is Process Pro signing out.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.